April 27, 2009. 7:18 a.m. Detroit, Michigan. Inside the Renaissance Center, the air feels heavier than usual. Televisions glow in muted blues across the executive floor. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is hovering around 8,000. It had peaked at 14,164.53 on October 9, 2007. Now the U.S. economy is in free fall. Lehman Brothers collapsed on September 15, 2008. The federal government signed the $700 billion TARP bailout into law on October 3, 2008. General Motors has already received $13.4 billion in emergency loans on December 19, 2008. But it's not enough. Rick Wagoner is gone, forced to resign by President Barack Obama on March 29, 2009. In a closed-door meeting that morning, the new GM leadership presents a restructuring plan demanded by the U.S. Treasury. 4 brands will survive: Chevrolet, Cadillac, Buick, GMC. One name is missing: Pontiac. A brand born in 1926. A symbol of American performance: the GDO, the Firebird, the Trans Am, the rebellious Arrowhead. By the end of that meeting, Pontiac is dead. Not because customers stopped loving it, not because engineers stopped building it, but because General Motors had quietly hollowed it out for decades. And when the crisis came, there was nothing left to save. To understand why Pontiac was killed, you have to leave 2009 and go back to Detroit in the winter of 1968. Pontiac is roaring. The GTO has ignited the muscle car era. Sales surge. The brand moves over 900,000 vehicles in 1968 alone. Pontiac is positioned as GM's performance division: youthful, aggressive, aspirational. Chevrolet is mainstream. Oldsmobile is middle-class respectability. Buick is near luxury. Cadillac is prestige. Pontiac is the adrenaline. The structure, designed by Alfred P. Sloan decades earlier. A car for every purse and purpose, works brilliantly when the market is expanding. But the architecture hides a weakness: internal competition. By the 1970s, emissions regulations and the oil embargo of October 19, 1973 begin suffocating muscle cars. Insurance premiums spike. Horsepower drops. Pontiac loses its edge. GM responds not with reinvention, but with badge engineering. Cars begin sharing platforms across divisions. A Chevrolet with minor cosmetic changes becomes a Pontiac. A Pontiac becomes a Buick with different headlights. Inside GM, cost savings take priority over brand identity. The Arrowhead logo remains. The soul fades. Fast forward to December 4th, 1995. The Dow crosses 5,000 for the first time. The economy booms. SUVs explode in popularity. Light trucks, regulated differently under CAFE standards created in 1975, generate enormous margins. GM leans into trucks and SUVs. Pontiac follows. The Firebird struggles. The GTO disappears in 1974, returns briefly in the 2000s as a rebadged Australian Holden, then fades again. The brand becomes a shadow. By the early 2000s, GM is bloated. 8 North American brands, overlapping models, redundant factories, massive pension obligations. In 2005, GM reports a $10.6 billion net loss. In 2007, it reports a catastrophic $38.7 billion loss, the largest annual loss in U.S. corporate history at the time. Rick Wagoner insists the downturn is cyclical, but the structural decay is deeper. By July 2008, gasoline prices exceed $4 per gallon. SUV and truck sales plummet. Credit markets tighten. Auto loans become harder to secure. On September 15, 2008, Lehman Brothers collapses. By November 21, 2008, GM stock closes at $3.29. Factories slow. Dealerships go quiet. The smell of grease and hot metal in assembly plants gives way to cold air and silence. Pontiac dealers know something is coming. Inside the Renaissance Center, restructuring plans are drawn up. The U.S. Treasury demands viability. The Obama administration's Auto Task Force evaluates GM's survival plan in early 2009. The math is ruthless. Too many brands dilute marketing budgets. Too many dealerships dilute profit. Too many platforms dilute focus. On April 27, 2009, GM announces it will phase out Pontiac by the end of 2010. The official explanation is efficiency. The unofficial truth is harsher. Pontiac had been sacrificed years earlier. By the mid-2000s, Pontiac's lineup consisted largely of rebadged Chevrolets. The Pontiac G6 shared underpinnings with the Chevrolet Malibu. The Touran SUV was a sibling of the Chevy Equinox. There was no clear identity. When consumers walked into showrooms, they often couldn't articulate why Pontiac existed separately from Chevrolet. Brand cannibalization had eroded differentiation. Psychologically, GM executives fell victim to scale arrogance. They believed the corporation was too big to fail, too diversified to collapse. But scale became paralysis. Internal silos prevented swift restructuring. Legacy costs mounted. Quality issues lingered. The ignition switch scandal that would later explode under Mary Barra's leadership in 2014 revealed systemic cultural problems, decisions delayed, warnings ignored, accountability diffused. The rot wasn't new. It was inherited. Pontiac was an early casualty of that culture. When GM filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy on June 1, 2009, it did so with government backing. Old GM was left with liabilities. New GM emerged leaner on July 10, 2009, with the U.S. Treasury initially holding a 60.8% stake. Taxpayers became shareholders. In that surgical restructuring, brands were amputated. Pontiac, Saturn, Hummer, Saab. 4 names erased. The decision wasn't sentimental, it was financial triage. But here's the darker layer. Pontiac could have been saved. In 2008, the Pontiac G8, imported from Australia's Holden division, received strong reviews. It was rear-wheel drive, performance-oriented, praised by critics. But the global financial collapse suffocated experimentation. There was no capital to reinvent. No patience for brand rebuilding. Only survival. When GM returned to public markets on November 18, 2010 with an IPO priced at $33 per share, investors weren't buying nostalgia, they were buying stability. The Renaissance Center still stands today, but Pontiac dealerships across America closed their doors in 2010. Some buildings remained vacant. Others were absorbed by Chevrolet franchises. The Arrowhead logos were stripped down, leaving faint outlines on brick facades, ghosts of a brand that once defined youth rebellion. The American dream once promised upward mobility through performance and individuality. Pontiac embodied that ethos. But by the 2000s, the dream had shifted toward safety and crossovers. Status anxiety replaced speed. Consumers wanted practicality over horsepower. And GM, desperate for cash, prioritized volume over identity. The biggest sin wasn't killing Pontiac in 2009. It was starving it for decades. By the time the crisis arrived, Pontiac was already hollow. Executives didn't murder a thriving division. They euthanized a weakened one. Rick Wagoner left with compensation packages intact before his forced resignation. Other executives transitioned quietly. Pontiac workers faced layoffs. Communities absorbed the loss. Mary Barra would later steer GM toward electric vehicles and autonomous technology, positioning the company for a different future. But Pontiac never made that journey. Its legacy lives in car shows, in restored Firebirds, in enthusiasts who still speak the name with reverence. Yet the corporate calculus remains chilling. In times of crisis, identity is expendable. When survival is at stake, heritage becomes a liability. Pontiac wasn't killed in a single meeting in April 2009. It was dismantled slowly through badge engineering, strategic neglect, and cultural complacency. The financial crisis simply delivered the final blow. Next time you see an old Trans Am rumble past, remember this: brands don't die from lack of fans. They die from lack of conviction. Next time we uncover the automaker that may be repeating the same fatal pattern.